Welcome. Welcome back. Welcome to part 5 of our 12-part series on Turning the Page, a self-guided Recovery Dharma book study course in which we walk you through the entirety of the Recovery Dharma workbook. Yeah, that's right. Over 12 episodes, 12 videos, 12, whatever you want to call them. We're going to go through the Recovery Dharma workbook together. So if you're just stumbling across this video, if you don't have a copy of the book, get a copy of the book, get a hardback copy of the book. Ideally, as we go through this workshop, you should be highlighting things out of your copy of the book, and you should be underlining things. You should be making notes. You should be making this an interactive, self-guided workshop as in book study. This should not just be me talking to a camera, sharing my experience. This should be you going through the book, highlighting things, underlining it, having your own commentary and your own inner dialogue of what works for you, what sticks out to you, et cetera, et cetera. So, in the last video, we talked about the Four Noble Truths. There's a bunch of inquiry questions in those Four Noble Truths. So, take a look at those inquiry questions, start to kind of look at them. You don't need to do all of them at the same time. Take your time with them. And also, best practices as you go through inquiry questions through the Four Noble Truths, as well as the Eightfold Path. As we start to get into these, remember to always do inquiry questions with a spirit of investigation, a spirit of self-compassion. The inquiry questions are not intended to beat you up or to make you feel guilty or shameful. They are a self-exploration to dig into our causes and conditions. So, kind of a little bit of a side there, but since we just wrapped at the Four Noble Truths, I feel like it's an appropriate time to say that. So, yeah, keep working your inquiries, keep going through the book yourself, keep highlighting things, underlining things. And in this video, we're going to talk about wise understanding. Wise understanding. What is that? Let's talk about it. Okay, so wise understanding, or sometimes translated as wise view. As we go through the Eightfold Path, if you haven't already watched the video, we have a quick start guide on the practice, as I affectionately call it. And in the path, we talk about the Eightfold Path and how they are eight spokes on a wheel. I'm not going to repeat that explanation, but if you haven't done so already, check out the quick start guide to the practice and specifically watch the video on the path because that's where we're at. We're talking about the path. We're one of the four guiding principles of the practice, which is foundational to the Recovery Dharma program, is that we commit to exploration of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path traditionally begins with wise understanding. So, wise understanding, what's that? So, wise understanding, the quote that I like, that I think summarizes it pretty well in the book, and it's right at the beginning of the section, conveniently enough, is as we engage in the world, rather than withdraw from it, we can use wise understanding to live without clinging, attachment, or craving. By paying attention to our actions and the results, that's the key word there, the results of those actions, we can begin to change where our choices are leading. If we intend to act in ways that have positive results, and if we're aware of the true intention and the nature of our actions, then we'll see better results. Better meaning less suffering and less harm. And if I'm not mistaken, I have another quote. Yeah, on the next page, on page 18, to continue that thought process and that understanding is if we act skillfully with understanding and compassion, it's possible to cause positive, beneficial effects for ourselves and others. If we act with unskillful intention, we cause our own suffering. Yeah. So if you and I were going through this workbook together, this is the point where working together, I would stress emphatically to you one of the biggest things that drew me to the Recovery Dharma program and draws me to Buddhist recovery is this concept of cause and effect. Cause and effect. It's a big part of wise understanding. There's a lot of elements to wise understanding, wise view in a Buddhist philosophy, but for recovery applications, The big takeaway of this chapter, and the big thing to remember about wise understanding, is that it embraces the concept of karma. And karma, for those of us who come from more of a secular background, can also be interpreted as the phrase cause and effect. And the cool thing about cause and effect, and why this is a different approach to recovery, is that it's a really pragmatic way to look at your life. In that all the teachings of the Buddha, all the teachings of this practice, and again, much of this you could argue is that Siddhartha Gautama, Uncle Sid, the Buddha, who was a person, was the world's first cognitive behavioral therapist, and that much of this is based on the premise of cause and effect and or karma, and it's this idea that we can systematically retrain our hearts and minds. Like that's what I love about this stuff is the fact that it's essentially a systematic retraining of our hearts and minds. And it's a systematic retraining of our hearts and minds, both in wise understanding as well as in wise intention that we'll get into next week's video or the next video in this playlist. And it's this systematic retraining of our hearts and minds, in that if we cultivate and move towards positive, healthy, beneficial actions, we will see positive, healthy, beneficial things grow in our lives. Whereas we cultivate harmful, negative, unbeneficial things, we'll see those grow in our lives. So it's very much we harvest what we reap. You sow what you reap. I don't know. I'm probably messing up that terminology there. If you plant seeds of loving kindness, you're going to harvest those down the road. Whereas if you plant seeds of greed, jealousy, hatred, you're going to harvest those down the road. The concept of wise understanding or skillful understanding, depending on your translation, is very much cause and effect, and that we have control over our lives. That this isn't about divine arbitration. We have cause and effect in our lives. The other thing I want to point out, the other quotes to get into, and this one's in orange, which means it's really important. On page 18, this doesn't mean that we always have control over our experiences. No matter how skillful we act, the external world, people, places, things, societal structures might not give us what we want. This does not mean we have quote unquote bad karma or that we failed. It just means that we're not in control of everything and everyone. The point is that regardless of what the outside world throws at us, we're responsible for how we respond to it. Responsible for how we respond to it and how we tend to our internal world. At the end of the day, we have the choice whether to go to bed as somebody who acted wisely and compassionately or as somebody who didn't, which is the essence of why we start to do the meditative practice, is that we can start to objectively observe our thoughts, feelings, and reactivity. And then we can choose through mindfulness, through compassion, we can choose to live more wisely and to and ultimately free ourselves from the suffering of addiction. Yeah, that said, we can have the best wishes out there possible, but there's a lot of stuff outside of our control in life. It's a very stoic philosophy perspective of there's certain things in life that we can control, and there's certain things that we can't. It does tie in with the traditional 12-step prayer, the serenity prayer of, uh, God, grant me serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that theme is found in Stoic philosophy and many other spiritual traditions as well. But it's this idea that of acceptance that there's certain things societally that we aren't going to be able to change in life. But it's also having the courage to change the things that we can in life and having the courage to begin a practice, to have the courage to do the inquiry work, to be able to sit down. It's having the courage, to feel the feelings that we don't want to feel. It's the treasure we seek is in the cave that we fear the most to enter. Yeah, which ultimately leads us into the third quote that I want to say. So, point one is cause and effect. We embrace that as a Buddhist philosophy. Point two is the fact that even though we understand cause and effect as a premise of the universe, there's certain things outside our control as addicts. And yeah, that sucks, but life is life. And then ultimately, the third point that I want to end on is it's important to note that being responsible for our own happiness and suffering doesn't mean we're responsible for pain inflicted on us by others or by circumstances out of our control. Heck yeah. Many of us have experienced victimization, oppression, and trauma through no fault of our own. The pain from these experiences should not be met with the, the pain from these experiences should be met with compassion, understanding, and wise boundaries, not minimized, invalidated, or pushed away. In recovery, we learn that we don't have to add an extra layer of suffering to this pain. We can begin to heal rather than let these experiences or actions of others control and limit us. And the last thing to say on this section is that last line, it's how we respond to pain that determines our experiences. Yeah, that's equanimity, right, in a single line. Um, you know, much of recovery is setting healthy boundaries, not minimizing what's been done to us, acknowledging it, digging into the cause and conditions. But when I'm working with someone, if we were working one on one and we're talking about wise understanding, the biggest takeaway is cause and effect, and taking ownership of our actions, ownership of our behavior, ownership of our addictions, and ownership of what the next steps forward are and what that looks like to each of us. So, yeah, if you're new to Buddhist recovery, I'd ask you to do some journaling on what does cause and effect mean to you. You know, what's led you to where you're at currently. I'd also probably check in with you, see how you're doing on the Four Noble Truths inquiries. But yeah, generally speaking, this is a different path of recovery, is a different approach to substance abuse. So next week, next video, we're going to get into wise intention. Wise intention. And wise intention is the longest of all the sections of the book. So yeah, we'll get into wise intention, compassion, heart practices, and a fun little thing called what's referred to as the Brahma Viharas. So thank you so much for your interest in Buddhist recovery. Thank you for your interest in these videos. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.